The English countryside in the summer of 1887 was a tapestry of emerald green and gold. Blackwood Manor, a hulking edifice of gray stone and ivy, stood sentinel over its lands, its windows winking in the late afternoon sun like sleepy eyes. To Alara Blackwood it was not a home, but a beautiful cage. At 20, she was the sole heir to a legacy that felt more like a weight upon her slender shoulders. Her father, Lord Alastair Blackwood, was a man carved from granite and tradition, his love for her as real as it was stifling, expressed not in words but in the strict boundaries he drew around her life. On this particular afternoon, Alara sought refuge in the one place that felt truly hers, the old library. It was a cavern of forgotten stories, smelling of aged leather, dust, and beeswax. Sunlight streamed through the tall leaded windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air like tiny fairies. It was here, while searching for a volume of Byron to match her restless mood, that her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic tucked behind a row of books on the highest shelf. Curiosity piqued, she stood on her toes, straining to grasp it. It was a small, ornately carved wooden box, its dark wood smooth with age. With a trembling heart she carried it to the window seat. The box was locked, but the key was tucked neatly underneath it, a tiny, rusted thing that felt like a secret in her palm. Taking a deep breath, she inserted the key. It turned with a soft, protesting click. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a locket. It was exquisite, a delicate piece of rose gold in the shape of a heart, with a single, small ruby embedded at its center. It pulsed in the sunlight like a tiny, captured heartbeat. Her fingers, clumsy with anticipation, fumbled with the clasp. It opened to reveal not a painting, as she had expected, but a tiny, folded piece of paper. Unfolding it carefully, she saw it was a lock of hair, a rich, dark brown, and a name, written in an elegant, flowing script, Isabel *. And beneath the hair a date, June 15, 1867. Alara's breath caught in her throat. 20 years ago, almost to the day. Who was Isabel? The name was a ghost in the halls of Blackwood, never spoken, never acknowledged. A cold dread mixed with a thrilling curiosity began to coil in her stomach. This was no forgotten trinket of a servant. The quality of the locket, the secrecy of its hiding place, spoke of something far more significant. That evening, dinner was a quiet affair. The only sounds were the ticking of the grandfather clock and the clinking of silver on fine china. Lord Alastair sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of stern propriety. "Father," Alara began, her voice softer than she intended, "I was in the library today." He grunted, not looking up from his soup. "I found something, a locket." She watched him closely. The spoon in his hand stilled for a fraction of a second, the only crack in his composure. It had a name inside, Isabel. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. Lord Alastair slowly placed his spoon down, his knuckles white. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were not angry, but held a profound, weary sadness she had never seen before. "That name is not to be spoken in this house, Alara," he said, his voice low and final, a door slamming shut on a room she never knew existed. "It belonged to a chapter of our lives that is best left forgotten. Put it back where you found it." But his reaction, the pain in his eyes, did the opposite of quelling her curiosity. It ignited it. The locket, once a simple curiosity, was now a key. And Alara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would not put it back. The hidden truth of an old life had found her, and it was begging to be heard. The forbidden name, Isabel *, became an echo in Alara's mind, a haunting melody she couldn't silence. Lord Alastair's uncharacteristic display of emotion had drawn a line in the sand of their quiet existence, and Alara found herself standing squarely on the side of the secret. The crimson locket, now hidden beneath her pillow, felt alive against the linen, its mystery a constant, pulsating presence. Driven by a need he could not understand, she began a silent investigation of her own home. She wandered the long, portrait-lined galleries, studying the faces of her ancestors, stern men in military regalia, women with placid smiles and lace collars. None were named Isabel. She inquired with Mrs. Abbott, the ancient, kind-eyed housekeeper who had been at Blackwood since before Alara was born. "Isabel, miss?" Mrs. Abbott's hand stilled over the dough she was kneading, a cloud passing over her gentle features. "A long time ago, that was. A summer person. Best not to dwell on the past, my dear. Some memories are too sharp, like broken glass." Another deflection, another gentle warning. It only solidified Alara's resolve. If the past was a locked room, she would find another way in. Her search led her to the one place in Blackwood Manor that was truly neglected, the attic. It was a kingdom of dust and shadows, filled with the spectral shapes of sheet-covered furniture and generations of discarded memories. The air was thick and still, smelling of camphor and decay. For hours, she sifted through trunks of outdated fashions, boxes of yellowed letters tied with faded ribbon, and broken toys that once belonged to children she never knew. Just as the light began to fade, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor, her persistence was rewarded. Tucked behind a large, cracked mirror, she found it. A portrait, turned to face the wall as if in shame. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she carefully, reverently, turned it around. The breath left her body in a soft gasp. The woman in the painting was breathtaking. She had Alara's own chestnut hair, but it fell in wild, untamed curls around her shoulders, not pinned in a proper chignon. Her eyes, a vibrant, laughing green, held a spark of mischief and life that Alara had never seen in any other family portrait. They were eyes that had known joy. She wore a simple, flowing dress of cream muslin, not the stiff silks of the ladies in the gallery below, and on her lips was a smile that was both gentle and rebellious. But it was the small, unmistakable detail at her throat that made Alara's hand fly to her own chest. The woman was wearing the crimson locket. This was Isabel. Alara sank onto a dusty trunk, her eyes never leaving the portrait. This vibrant, beautiful woman was her mother. The truth settled over her not as a shock but as a deep, resonating chord of recognition. The stories of her mother's death in childbirth, the vague, sorrowful nods, they were a lie. This woman was too full of life to be defined by a single, tragic event. There was more to her story. Why was she hidden away in the attic, her name forbidden? As she sat in the gathering gloom, a new determination took root. She would not just uncover who Isabel was, she would discover what happened to her. The portrait was not an end, but a beginning. It was a window into a world of love and loss that her father had tried to bury, and Alara knew she had to step through it, no matter how painful the journey. The following days were a blur of stolen moments. Alara would retreat to the attic, sitting before the portrait of Isabel as if in silent communion. She felt a connection to this woman that transcended time, a pull on her very soul. The official story was a fragile veneer, and the truth was the powerful current running beneath it. Her search for answers led her beyond the manor's walls, into the sun-dappled embrace of the gardens. It was there, among the blooming roses her father so prized, that she found an unexpected ally. His name was Thomas, the gardener's son. He was a few years older than her, with sun-kissed skin, hands calloused from work, and eyes the color of the summer sky. He possessed a quiet confidence that set him apart from the other servants. Their paths had crossed for years in polite, distant nods, but now, armed with her secret, Alara saw him differently. He was of this land, its soil and seasons woven into his very being. If anyone knew the old stories, it would be someone like him. One afternoon, she found him tending a bed of lavender, the air thick with its calming scent. Gathering her courage, she approached, the crimson locket a hidden warmth against her skin. "Thomas," she began, her voice slightly unsteady, "you've lived here all your life, haven't you?" He looked up, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, a small, easy smile on his face. "I, Miss Alara, as did my father and his before him." She took a deep breath. Did you ever hear of a woman named Isabel?" The smile vanished from his face. He glanced around, ensuring they were alone. The cheerful sounds of birdsong suddenly felt distant. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Isabel? That's a name I haven't heard since I was a boy. My grandmother used to speak of her. She said the sun itself shone brighter when Miss Isabel walked the grounds." Alara's heart leapt. What else did she say? Thomas led her to a secluded stone bench, hidden from the house by a curtain of weeping willow. "She wasn't from here," he said, his gaze distant as if recalling an old tale. "She came to stay for a summer, a distant cousin, they said, full of music and laughter. She didn't care for propriety. She'd walk barefoot in the grass and talk to the gardeners as if they were friends." He paused, looking at Alara with a new intensity. "She looked like you, truly like you." "What happened to her, Thomas?" Alara pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "My father, he refuses to speak of her." Thomas's expression grew somber. "The story they tell is that she died soon after you were born, a fever." He leaned closer, his voice dropping even further. "But that's not the story my grandmother told. She said there was a man, a painter who came to do her portrait, that they fell in love." The pieces began to click into place with a terrifying clarity. The portrait in the attic, the hidden locket, her father's bitter silence. Lord Alistair, Thomas continued, his words heavy with the weight of the past, was betrothed to her. It was an arranged match to consolidate the family fortunes, but her heart belonged to another. When he found out, the scandal was immense. The painter was driven from the county, his name ruined. And Isabel, he shook his head, his eyes full of pity. She was heartbroken. They say her spirit faded from this world long before her body did. She was sent away to a convent in the north, some said. Others whispered she simply disappeared, but she never truly left Blackwood, not really. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, not just of sadness for Isabel's tragedy, but of a profound, righteous anger. Her entire life had been built upon a foundation of half-truths and a buried scandal. Her father had not just hidden a portrait. He had hidden a story of a vibrant love crushed by duty and pride. And in doing so, he had erased the true essence of the woman who gave her life. The cage of Blackwood Manor now felt not just stifling, but built on a lie. The story Thomas told took root in Alara's heart, a bittersweet vine of truth that both wounded and sustained her. Isabel was no longer a ghost. She was a woman of passion and rebellion, a victim of the very traditions that now constrained Alara herself. The knowledge created a chasm between Alara and her father, one filled with unspoken accusations, and a grief that was 2 decades old yet felt as fresh as morning dew. One evening, sitting by her window and watching the moon rise over the estate, she took the crimson locket from its hiding place. She traced the delicate rose gold with her finger, feeling the cool, smooth surface of the ruby. It was a love token, she was sure of it, a gift from the painter. But the tiny, folded paper with the lock of hair, was that all? Driven by a sudden impulse, she held the locket closer to the candle flame, examining the interior again. The space where the paper sat seemed shallow. Too shallow. Her heart began to race. Using the tip of a hairpin, she carefully probed the edges of the velvet lining inside the locket. There was a slight give. With painstaking slowness, she pried it up, and there, hidden beneath, lay the real secret. Not one, but several tiny, tightly folded sheets of paper, covered in the same elegant script as the name Isabel *. Hands trembling, she unfolded the first. "My dearest Isabel," it began. "The moon is high and my heart is full of you. These stolen moments in the garden are the only truth I know in this world of pretense. When I paint you, I do not capture your likeness but your soul, wild, beautiful, and untamable. This locket is a poor substitute for my arms around you, but let it be a promise of a life beyond these walls *. Alara read on, her tears blurring the ink. Page after page, the letters unfolded a love story so intense, so pure, it made the world around her seem dull and gray in comparison. The writer, a man named Julian, spoke of secret meetings, of plans to elope, of a future built on art and love, free from the shackles of society. His words were a balm and a fire, painting a picture of her mother that was more vivid than any portrait. The final letter was different. The script was hurried, the words jagged with panic. "Isabel, my love, he knows. Alistair has discovered everything. He calls it a betrayal of the worst kind. He has threatened to ruin me to ensure I never work again. He is sending you away. Meet me at the old boathouse at midnight. We have only this one chance. I will be there. I will wait for you. Whatever happens, know that I love you. Forever, Julian." Midnight, the old boathouse. Alara's breath caught. Did she go? The fact that the locket and these letters were hidden in the library suggested she never had the chance to retrieve them. Had her father intercepted her? Had Julian waited in vain, his heart breaking with the passing hours? The story was no longer just a sad tale of the past. It was a cliffhanger, a moment of crisis frozen in time. And Alara held the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. She knew the rendezvous point. She knew the promise that was broken. The weight of it was immense. She was the keeper of a love that never had its chance, the living proof of a life her mother was forced to leave behind. The truth was no longer a hidden thing. It was a responsibility, and it demanded to be honored. The letters burned in Alara's possession, their words seared into her memory. The romantic tragedy of Isabel and Julian had solidified into a cold, hard anger towards her father. He hadn't just been a jilted suitor. He had been a jailer, a man who valued his pride and social standing above a woman's heart, above her very life. She could no longer live in the same house with the ghost of this lie hanging between them. The silence had become a roar in her ears. She waited for him in his study after dinner, the crimson locket clutched tightly in her hand. The room was a monument to him, dark wood, hunting trophies on the walls, shelves of ledgers detailing the estate's fortunes. It was a world of cold, hard facts, with no room for the messy truths of the heart. Lord Alistair entered, his expression one of mild surprise. "Ilara, is something the matter?" "Everything is the matter, father," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She opened her hand, letting the locket dangle from its chain, catching the firelight. "I know about Isabel. I know she was my mother. And I know about Julian." The blood drained from his face. For a moment he looked old, stripped of his authority and power. He sank heavily into his leather armchair, the fight gone out of him. "Ilara, you do not understand." "Then make me understand," she cried, the dam of her composure breaking. "You loved her, didn't you? And when you found she loved another, you destroyed them both. You hid her portrait, you forbade her name, you sent her away. Did you even care that she died of a broken heart?" "She didn't die." The words, spoken so quietly, so flatly, sucked all the air from the room. Ilara stared at him, uncomprehending. "What?" Lord Alistair looked into the fire, his eyes seeing a different time. "She didn't die in childbirth. That was the story we told to spare the family the shame." He took a ragged breath. "I loved her, Ilara, desperately, foolishly, but she saw me as her jailer from the start. When I discovered her affair with that penniless artist, I was blinded by rage and humiliation. Yes, I threatened him. Yes, I told her she would be sent away. But I never meant—" His voice broke. "The night she was to run away with him, she came to me first. She begged me to let her go. She said she would wither and die in a life without love. I refused. I was too proud." He looked at Ilara, his eyes swimming with a grief so raw it was almost tangible. "She left the manor that night, but she never went to the boathouse. We found her cloak by the lake the next morning. She had taken her own life, Ilara. The current, we never found her body." The revelation struck Ilara with the force of a physical blow. The truth was far worse than she had imagined. It wasn't a story of banishment, but of utter despair. Her mother hadn't faded away. She had chosen the eternal silence of the lake over the silent prison of her life at Blackwood. Her anger evaporated, replaced by a devastating shared sorrow. The man before her was not a monster, but a man who had loved and lost, whose pride had led to an unthinkable tragedy that had haunted him for 20 years. The weight of his guilt, the secret he had carried, was a burden she could scarcely comprehend. The hidden truth was no longer a weapon, but a terrible, shared wound. In the days that followed, a new, fragile peace settled over Blackwood Manor. The great, unspoken sorrow had been named, and in its numbing, it had lost some of its power to haunt. Lord Alistair and Ilara moved around each other like two wounded animals, bound by a shared loss they were only beginning to navigate. One morning, Ilara went to the attic. She did not bring the portrait of Isabel down to the gallery. That would have been a disrespect to the memory of the vibrant, unconventional woman her mother was. Instead, she brought it to her own bedroom, placing it on the mantelpiece where she would see it every morning. Isabel's laughing green eyes would no longer stare at a dusty wall. They would look upon her daughter. Ilara also began to change. The knowledge of her mother's spirit, her love of music, her disregard for stifling conventions, freed something in her own soul. She started spending more time outdoors, not for sedate walks, but for long, rambling explorations of the estate, much to the confusion of her lady's maid. She began to talk with the tenants and the servants, not as the lady of the manor, but as someone genuinely interested in their lives, just as her mother had. She found herself often in the gardens, where Thomas was always working. Their shared secret had created a bond between them, a quiet understanding that needed few words. He showed her the secret places he loved, a hidden grove of bluebells, a hawthorn tree that was centuries old. With him, she didn't have to be the tragic heiress or the proper lady. She could simply be Ilara. One afternoon, as they stood by the old, dilapidated boathouse, a place now sacred and sorrowful to her, Thomas pointed to a patch of wild, untamed roses growing by the water's edge. "My grandmother planted those," he said softly, "for Isabel. She said they were the same color as the locket." Ilara felt a profound sense of closure, not an ending but a beginning. The past could not be changed. Her mother's tragic story was etched in stone, but her own story was still being written. She looked from the wild roses to Thomas's honest, kind face, and then back towards Blackwood Manor. She saw not a cage, but a legacy. It was a legacy of love as much as it was of loss. She understood now that her father's overprotectiveness had sprung from a terrible fear of losing her as he had lost Isabel. It was a flawed love, but it was real. She would not run away, nor would she wither in silence. She would honor her mother's memory not with rebellion for its own sake, but by living a life of authentic feeling. She would bring music back to the halls of Blackwood. She would fill it with the life it had been missing. She would bridge the chasm between her father's world of duty and her mother's world of passion, creating something new, something stronger. The crimson locket was no longer a symbol of a hidden, tragic past. As she fastened it around her neck, openly for the first time, she felt its weight not as a burden, but as a touchstone. It was a reminder of the price of pride, the power of love, and the resilience of the human heart. It was a promise to live a life worthy of both her parents' stories, a life that embraced both the structured beauty of the manor and the wild, untamed freedom of the roses by the lake. Her story, at last, was her own to write,